Hey everybody, how is everybody do? Oh, let's see. Can everybody hear me? Can everybody see me? If you guys can, make sure you guys are doing the thumbs up just to make sure that all the audio is working. You guys can see I'm donning some glasses today, so it's a different look I'm going for. So hopefully everybody is doing well. Welcome to today's call on interpersonal communications, really talking about how we can communicate to help motivate and inspire people. So right now we have about 40 people on. So welcome. I see some of the names that are coming in, some familiar names. Dean, Brooks, Melissa, welcome. And honestly, welcome to those who are in Asia right now. Thank you for joining in. I believe it's your morning at this point right now. Honestly, it's so good to see you guys. And just so you guys know, at this point, I've been doing about, one Soulcast Media Live a month, but I'm trying to ramp it up because I truly am enjoying spending this time with you. But you know what? It's 05 right now. So let's just dive into what we're talking about today. As I mentioned, it's all about interpersonal communications. And what I hope to do with this is to kind of just have a dialogue. I have my guest here who I'm going to introduce in just a few seconds, but I really just want to have a conversation about communications. And I'm going to have this conversation with Eric. But as I'm talking, if you guys have any questions, any comments, anything that you want us to answer as we are doing it, throw it in the chat function. I can see everything, and I'll make sure that we have some time to address your questions, any communications questions, really. So without further ado, I want to welcome everybody to the Soulcast Media Live. My name is Jessica Chen, and I'm the founder and CEO of Soulcast Media. We are a business communications agency, so we work with Fortune 500 companies, one-on-one online courses, but it's all about communications and how people can better present themselves and their delivery now that we're on virtual calls. So with that, I wanted to introduce my guest, who I'm so excited to have here with me, Eric Chen. Eric, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and share with the world, please.
Thank you for having me, Jessica. My name is Eric Chen, and I am currently a serial entrepreneur. I previously have worked corporate for several years and decided to go off on my own to start my own business. And in the last several years, I've been able to grow a few different types of businesses within the branding world, e-commerce, product, manufacturing, and just being able to scale global teams all across the board. And I think as of late, the most exciting venture that we did launch was a small passion project that we have called the Boba card game.
Yes.
It's also known as Sabobatage. So that's been really exciting, and just having a team be able to spin that up most recently. But in the day-to-day, the most recent venture launch that we did last year was a new media company called needthat.com. And so that's still in the works. It's still being slowly built out. But within 4 months, we were able to get about 20 million in impressions through our different content, especially through video.
Mm-hmm. So the reason why I actually wanted Eric to join us, and I'll share the capacity in terms of how we sort of worked together. So Eric mentioned this Boba card game that launched just a few weeks ago. And the reason why I came in and helped him with this is I actually helped him in the communications aspect of it, not the speaking, but more of the how can you communicate to your audience, right? And this just goes back to marketing. And I never say I'm a marketing expert whatsoever, but I do know one thing when it comes to communicating. You have to tailor your message to speak to the audience you're targeting. So, in Eric's case with his Boba card game, obviously it's a very niche sort of game. Fortunately, it is, based off a product a lot of Asian American folks like us enjoy, which is the Boba milk tea, which, by the way, if you have not tried it, please do. So when Eric and I worked together, we talked a lot about, okay, how do we want to craft the message? We talked about things like storytelling. So Eric, what were some of the things, I'm curious, that you also thought of that you really wanted to hone in on your communications in terms of messaging?
Definitely. Great question, Jessica. I mean, for me, my favorite thing about business is really comes down to the marketing aspect. So I knew all of the growth marketing tactics, how to sell to people, but really what it came down to is like, how do I personalize this message for it to get across in a broader range? And especially because, like you mentioned, boba in itself, it's gone global already, right?
True.
So how do I craft a message that's going to reach the entire world, not just a U.S. consumer base or in certain regions or areas? Because for me, while you mentioned that it is a niche item, it's still adopted globally, right? And so really, it's like, how do you get this message across, where it's not just boba in itself, the drink, and it's not just a card game, but how do you basically touch the audience or touch the lives of other people to inspire them to want to adopt your product? It just happens that this in its form happens to be a boba card game, right? And so one of the things that you and I worked on was just communicating that across the board. And really, what I learned from you is we weren't just selling a boba card game; we were selling on the idea of families that could get together, right? Having game nights, being able to share the bond, right? Especially with you, when you mentioned your experience with boba, that allowed me to dive into like, how do you really dive into each person's persona? Like, what does boba mean to each person? And I think that's part of the messaging here, where in our headline, where friendships are made with boba, right? And you typically will go and grab a boba drink with your friends in pastime, whether it's after work or for the afternoon. And from there, that's where we really cater the message, because there is that novelty of idea where people can immediately relate to, right? They want to go get boba with their friends or with their families or with their kids. And so I think that was the first step to our messaging in order to reach a broader audience.
Yeah. And I think this is really key. And by the way, for all 60 some people who are on this, welcome. I'm here with Eric Chen talking about interpersonal communications, but really about how you can really have a powerful message, which really does come down to your audience. So one of the things that we talked about when we were talking about how can we communicate your product, a lot of people I've noticed that I've worked with, they get very hyper focused on what it is that they want to say, meaning the technical aspects, which for many people, of course, that's very important, especially if the person you're working with, you guys are just trying to get the technical things done, right? But I think when we're talking about motivating, encouraging, inspiring, right? These key words, everybody needs to think about their messaging and their communications from a bird's eye view, right? And this is kind of how I think about even our day-to-day communications with our colleagues. So how can we motivate a team, right? A lot of times it's like everybody has a to-do list. I have to do this, check, 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 check. But sometimes it can make a world of a difference when your team knows why they're doing this, right? So if you are an aspiring boss or aspiring leader, or if you're already managing a team, I think it's so important for you to communicate that why, right? Like, why is everybody grinding every day, going down their to-do list? It's for that bigger purpose. And I think what we're trying to talk about today, the interpersonal communications, that needs to be spoken. So, you're talking about your boba game. And obviously, if you think of just any game, for example, it's a card game and there's things to do. But anytime you're quote unquote marketing it, you're not necessarily saying, okay, this is the card game and this is what you have to do. You said the message is about family. It's about coming together. It's about having fun. And given that a lot of us are still kind of cooped up at home, it's a family-friendly indoor game, right? So this is part of the messaging. I don't know if there's anything you want to add here, Eric.
Yeah, I think you touched on some really great points in regards to the family messaging. And some of the conversations I had, and I think, something that you brought up to me, it's like, make sure I am talking to the intended audience, especially in the way we're going to communicate, right? So a lot of the demographic that I reached out to, friends who are, either early 20s, mid 30s, and then parents who have kids around the age that would be appropriate to play, so 7 years and above. A lot of the parents said that this gives them a new idea or new activity to be able to play with their kids, right? If their kids, they're glued to the iPad, they're watching Netflix or cartoons or YouTube. And so even just taking that aspect and catering that message to the parents and the family, to me, that's how we were able to really target the family members, right? And so I would say that's how we cater the message, and especially thanks to you, because otherwise I think I would have bypassed the parents, because for me it's, let's just target who I believe were the young 20s and the teenagers who were just hanging out, who would normally hang out at a boba shop.
Mhm. So I think one takeaway message for our audience here is when you're thinking about crafting your message, there actually should be different types of messaging for one type of initiative. And that's what you just talked about, Eric. So one product, but parents communication, kids communication, right? And just like, somebody's everyday, working communications, right? If you have a campaign or a project that you guys are working on, how you communicate that initiative to your team versus your boss, it's going to be a little different because what people care about is different. And in order to motivate and inspire, you have to speak to what's inside, right? What is it that they care about? Anything else you want to add, Eric? Because I actually have another question I have for you.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a really great point with the pretty much like a different tiers, I would say, in communication, whether it's to your higher ups or to middle management or to your employees or your team. Every type of communication is different, and it's almost the same thing. Actually, my background was in sales, so a lot of the time when I was reaching out to companies and businesses, a lot of the messaging in itself had to be different. If I was reaching out to CEO, right, the email would be different, the outreach would be different. If I was reaching out to a director level or the middle managers, or just even talking to the team, every message was different, right? So if you imagine if you're selling software, which is what I did previously, how it would help the employees in their day-to-day with the software was different, right? And then if you think the higher you go, the business owners would think about the revenue, how much money would they be saving, right? And so just even thinking about that in a business sense, all the way down to something as small as a card game, to the audience level you're talking to me, it's all one and the same.
Actually, you talked about sales, and I know that there's a few folks on this right now. We have about almost 60 people on this. I know there's some people here who have a sales background, and I'm sure they can appreciate, because you mentioned that your foundation is sales. It's funny when I think about the word sales. So for me, I mean, I don't think I'm a salesperson, but in some regards, everyone sort of is, and what are you selling? If it's not necessarily your company's product, many times you are selling, your capabilities, right? What you can bring to the table. So actually, I kind of want to pivot there, even though that was kind of unexpected. But
yeah,
what are some ways that you think about kind of positioning yourself in terms of selling to get people to get on board with you, to jump on your idea, things like that?
Yeah, I think I would basically bundle all of that up more so into a sales and a marketing idea where both really go hand in hand. And oftentimes you see in corporate, this is why the marketing team and the sales team work closely together, right? Because the messaging that marketing puts out, in addition to what the sales team, talks about with the customers, has to be aligned. And what the most wonderful thing today in our age, right? In the last 5, 6, 7 years, especially with social media, you're starting to see a lot of brands pick up. But what it comes down to is the self-branding that comes with it, right? Having a face to the name of the company, it's a lot more important today. And the way I look at it is that businesses are now becoming the product feature, right? It's like, oh, this is the company and this is what we offer. But like, what is the soul and the messaging? What is the mission behind the company, right? And it starts from the top down. It starts with the business person. It starts with the CEO. One of my friends who recently got a job at Redfin, he decided to pick up that job because he was just really inspired in the way that the CEO over at Redfin communicates with their team, and just being very open about, especially with during the beginning of the pandemic last year, about how flexible he was with making sure everyone was able to just work from home immediately, right? There wasn't any lag time with getting people to work remote. It's just health and safety first, take care of your family, whatever you need. And so even that as an example, as a leader, was really eye-opening to me, because I never really thought about it that way. And especially with last year with the everyone having to work from home, and that was one of the strongest reasons that my friend decided to go work for that company when he had a few different offers on the table too. And that as an example to me, it's like, yes, that's how a leader should communicate from the top down, because what he exudes for the business and the brand is going to then trickle down, right? Then it affects into the directors, into the managers, how they're going to manage their immediate team altogether. And so that's why marketing, self-branding, you as a leader, you are a brand, right?
Yeah.
And that just begins to show in the way you manage your team.
So I was like debating whether I should say this. So one of the upcoming LinkedIn learning courses that is going to be coming out, I think perhaps in the next few weeks, I'm not sure, but it actually has to do with leadership and visibility. I just finished shooting this with the LinkedIn Learning team, which, by the way, is fantastic. I know there's actually some LinkedIn Learning instructors watching right now. But when I was putting together this course of how can leaders and aspiring leaders become more visible, even though we're remote, it all came down to communications. Because a lot of leaders, sometimes they feel sort of stuck in how can I reach my team when everybody is in different parts of the world or different parts of the country, right? So in this course, which I don't want to share too much, I do offer some strategies of how can you communicate? Where can you communicate, right? Because even if you are at home, your team's everywhere else, you still need to be able to inspire. You still need to be able to lead. You can't just kind of hold up because, we don't know what's going on. So that was actually one thing that I was like, should I talk about that? Because I kind of wanted to wait. But you know what? I thought that was perfect for this conversation of, part of being a fantastic leader is that communications aspect, which we all know. But the reason why it's so important is because as a leader, they need to see you and hear you in order for the team to feel united in what they're doing. Now, one thing I actually want to add, I talk about leadership communications, but leadership communications isn't actually only reserved for leaders, right? You can be a young analyst, an associate, just starting out in your job, 1 or 2 years, or you can be, someone who's in the director, manager level, right? You still have a ways to go in terms of where you feel you want to be. But being a good, powerful leader doesn't mean that that's communications is only reserved for them. I think everybody needs to take a proactive approach in being, again, outspoken in terms of, getting their message out there, showcasing who they are. Because if leaders can see you lead, that's how they're going to pull you up with them. And again, this is kind of what I'm trying to talk about in terms of this interpersonal communications, this leading, this motivating. Anything you want to add, Eric?
Yeah, I think you bring up all really good points. And I think one of the most important things too, especially now and today, is also being very empathetic with your team, because
Yep.
you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, especially with your employees, with their family, if they have kids. And so especially now, and I mostly run a global team from all over the world. And so I don't have much visibility, and I've technically have always been working remote or building a global team remotely for the last few years. And so the only time I really get FaceTime with them is through Zoom calls. Before even Zoom became really popular, I was actually an advocate of Zoom. I think back in 2016. Actually, in the software company I was working for, I sold Zoom, or the software we were selling. And so
is Eric Chen on this call?
Eric Arlano, our friend.
Eric Chen, the CEO of Zoom. I was like, is he listening?
I don't know. Maybe he is. That was actually one of the largest accounts that we brought on back in 2016 or so. So it was exciting to see how far they've come. But in terms of having the global team, the only thing I can really do, especially in communication, just over Slack, over Zoom, is just really being open and understanding of what's going on with the situation. And I have to constantly remind my team that if they need time off, if they need extra time or free time, or just a little bit more flexibility within their day, I give it to them, just no questions asked. It's like, hey, my response is always, take care of yourself. Whatever you need to do, go ahead and get it done, right? Because for me, at the end of the day, the business isn't going to go anywhere, right? Yeah. Especially if they take a pause for an hour, 2 hours, or even have to take a day off because of some emergency. I'm completely open to it. For me as a leader, I just make sure that we have systems in place to make sure that we can, manage things, especially if, they have to take some time off, for instance. Mm-hmm. But just being really open to that, especially now with more and more people going remote, and you just not knowing what's happening. Because prior, when you're in an office, you're physically with them, so you can kind of navigate, you can understand each other's person's feelings just based on human interaction. But now it's all digital. So I think that's something that I've been more and more conscious of, especially in the last year.
Absolutely. I think empathetic leadership, it's not going to be one of those crazy buzzwords, because it's going to be, this is true. Like, this is really how it is. In fact, I'll share a little bit of how I think about managing my team. So everybody's also remote, and it's always been that way. And I do imagine it being like this. But for me, I'm not about micromanaging people. In fact, I remember early on in my career feeling micromanaged, and that would just stress me out. So for me, I make sure that when I'm if we're talking about a project we have to do, that we have our own like project management tool, but it's all about, we'll set these deadlines, right? We'll be very clear. We have to meet these deadlines. If you want to do it in the morning, you want to do it in the evening, it does not matter to me. As long as you just get it done and you do it well, I'm happy, and hopefully then they're happy, right? I don't think people enjoy people breathing down other people's throats. So
yeah, it's funny you bring that up, just because it's one of those things where it's like, I hope people get to experience some micro managing.
Oh God.
Right? In order to have that contrast in a good manager who's not as micromanaging, right? And for me, I'm actually like very, very flexible. So when I worked at my first job, I was actually a sales rep for ADP, which is the largest payroll company, Fortune 500 company. And going into the team, I was actually warned by everybody that the manager I was going to have is the most micromanaging boss there is. But to me, I was very open-minded, and I could understand why a lot of people, they didn't really last in that role very long. The territory I took over just kept flipping over and over. The turnover was high. And for me, I ended up staying in that role for 2.5 years, building out the territory. And while I understood the idea of my manager being micromanaging to an extent, at the end of the day, she really wasn't, because I knew she came in from a point of really wanting you to succeed. It's just, of course, she had to just make sure, like, yeah, how many calls are you doing? How many meetings have you set up? Are you, why aren't you closing, this and that? But at the end of the day, it was more so for your success. And I would say within the first year of working, for this type of manager, and especially because I would hear from the other teams from different regions the way that they get managed, like, oh yeah, our boss is like pretty flexible. They let us take long lunches and stuff. But to me, it actually built a really strong foundation of being really rigid with my schedule and making sure I wasn't wasting time. And I'm actually very grateful to have that structure as one of my very first jobs and being able to take that. But then now understanding, for managers who put total trust into their team, I think some people need it. Some people need that structure and rigidity into their first couple years of work, and then going from there, being able to build that yourself. And so now, or afterwards, I worked with managers who give you complete flexibility, but then I feel like it was too loose, right? A little bit too much freedom, and some people need that structure still.
So one of the things I actually want to go back and talking about is that interpersonal communications. By the way, we have about 70 people right now, which again, welcome. I'm here with Eric, and we are talking about interpersonal communications and how to communicate to engage and motivate. Actually, some of the top comments that are coming in are just like fantastic. So if anybody actually has any questions as we're talking about this, feel free. Eric and I can, talk about it, answer your questions. This one actually just came in. I saw this right now. Love this topic. When you show empathy towards others, their negative energy goes down and positive energy goes up. They become more purpose-driven as leaders with more empathy. So I completely agree with that. So I actually love talking about interpersonal communications, because I can't even talk right now. Interpersonal communications is essentially that, to me, and this is how I define it. Eric, you can kind of define it in your own words, but interpersonal communications is kind of those intimate conversations that you have with people, right? So it's not so much the public speaking where you're talking to a large audience, which is a whole different type of communications. It truly is. because I do a lot of public speaking training, right? You kind of have to put on a different hat because there's more of a performance aspect to public speaking. But when I think of interpersonal communications, I think back to, okay, how can I make sure that whoever I'm talking to, anybody, that I'm creating that rapport, that connection, that trust where they feel comfortable engaging with me. That's kind of what I mean when I talk about interpersonal communications. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I think, for me, the interpersonal side, very common values that you bring up. For me, it is about making sure that the person, that you build a trust around that person. And to me, that trust really comes down to being comfortable to talk about anything, especially if an employee they're struggling with something. And for me, because we've been scaling out pretty fast on the media side, a lot of the people are new, and I have to spend more time just bonding with our new employees, our new contractors, to make sure they're more in line with how we work. And, based on that, just simple understanding of just spending that time with each other, and especially now because everything's remote, that they have that level of comfortability to approach you about anything. And then in turn, that kind of translates back to the business side of things where, I don't want my team to ever feel stressed that they're not going to be able to meet a deadline. They're not going to be able to accomplish the projects, or they're running into an issue and then I can't fix it. And they're just sitting there stressing out. And I continuously remind them that, we have a team available to come in and help resolve it, right? I put my full trust into the team because I hired them for a very specific role or very specific specialty, and that they were hired for that specific job. But of course, if they can't, accomplish it, I'm there to help and support them. And I think that's, one of more of my leadership style is where I'm not just out there, just trying to, not necessarily just like motivate all the time, just like, hey, go, yeah, just keep going at it, just go do it.
I'm trying to be a motivational speaker here.
Not at all. One of the biggest things, and that I love to do is understanding how everything works and being right there with them. And so I will do my best in terms of helping them. Like, let's just say, for example, like a graphic designer, they have the art skills, the ability to draw. I don't. I can, do stick figures and everything and get some concepts going. But if I can't help them, I will go out of my way, or I will go look for resources or go talk to my other, friends or people in my network to be able to help guide my team as well, right? Kind of like a pseudo consultant, and bring them in. So then the team just feels like, okay, Eric always has my back, regardless if it's for the job or for the task at hand. And I would say all of those actions then translate into the interpersonal communications to build that trust, that they're never going to shy away from a task at hand, and that if they need help, they're not going to be afraid to ask for it.
Absolutely. By the way, thank you for those who are leaving their comments as Eric and I chat about this. I'm reading all of them. One thing that I actually wanted to share. So the best way to build a really good, interpersonal connection with somebody when you're communicating is really just making sure that you're doing less talking and they're doing more of the talking. Right? It's this balance of asking really good questions. In fact, I think some of my sales folks who are on this call can appreciate this, but there was actually a study that I was reading literally the other day of what's that ratio? What's the ratio between talking and listening? And I think it was something along the lines of, in order for other people to feel that they have expressed themselves, you should be doing pretty much like 65% listening, if not more, and then 35% talking. A lot of people, whether it's because they're nervous or because they just want to talk, they just end up hogging all the conversation. We've certainly been in those types of, I guess, engagements where you're like, wow, this person's talking a lot. I wonder if this person even is wondering what I think about it, right? So, I think for anybody who wants to think about being a strategic communicator, it's making sure that you're doing a little less talking and a little bit more listening.
So that's actually one of the biggest lessons that I took in the very first sales job. And I had a few mentors in the space that were, doing extremely well, or they're in a higher up position. And one of the biggest feedback that I got was just stop talking. And that's a really weird thing to hear from a salesperson and on a sales team, because you assume that what you're going to be doing is you're going to be pitching a customer, you're going to be talking a lot. And like you said, it really just comes down to asking the right questions and to really uncover and listen. So while your ratio, I think you said, is about 65% or so, I actually run, in all of my past sales jobs, I ran on a 20-80 rule.
Wow.
And so my questions, I would try to prepare myself to be as refined as possible when I get in touch with a customer, or if I'm having a sales call or a demo call, and just really uncovering that with the person. And one of those things is like, I would, even young salespeople, for instance, they'll get nervous and they'll just start spewing out features and about the products. But really, the customer doesn't care. So as long as you just ask them and let them tell you what their problems are, and you just take a moment to pause and just let them keep talking, even if I think this is something you teach in your executive presence, about even taking a pause in one-on-one conversations and then letting the other person speak, because there's that, few seconds of silence that some people may become uncomfortable with, but it's because it never really happens. People just want to fill that void. And I've seen it within my sales roles. I've seen it within working with my team, and just doing that, asking the questions, allows people to open up, one, and then two, help you uncover like what are the challenges or issues at hand, and then being able to then address it and find solutions to those, whether it's topics or challenges that they have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, it's all, you hear those people who literally just jump in and be like, okay, so let me tell you about this amazing product that I have, right? And I'm sure it's fantastic, but really the most effective way to build that interpersonal connection, that we're talking about, is instead go, so tell me, what are some of the challenges that you are currently facing? And as you listen, you're picking up some, words that they're saying that you can then repeat to them. And then you can qualify it with your product, of course, right? And then they'll feel like, wow, this person really understands my struggle. They're repeating what I'm saying. And then therefore they're like, I feel like I can trust this person. I mean, this is almost the essence, right? Of, again, I don't feel like I'm a salesperson, but I would feel like this is really how you should sell your product yourself. It's all about meeting the person where they're at.
Actually, and sorry, I just read Gary's comment of a husband's perspective is a 1 to 20 ratio. Very, very, very true. But I would just say, actually, one of the very first thing that I ask in the mornings with my team, especially if I'm asking one-on-one, I just ask my teammates or employees, like, how are you doing today? Like, before I even go into the tasks at hand, everything that they're going to be working on, or status updates, I simply just ask, how are you doing today? And I basically just let them navigate that conversation, so I understand kind of where their head is at. And I think more and more, like, over time, they understand when I ask that question that they can open it up. And that way I understand like how their day is going to be, if they're going to be productive, or if they have something that's on their mind or at hand. If they're overwhelmed with, a certain project, maybe I accidentally overloaded their projects, and then for them to have that communication for me right at the start of the day. And so that's just one simple thing that I do, especially when in the questioning formats with team members.
So one of the questions that I actually see somebody, this is from Brooks. Hey, Brooks. So the question that you have is, and I'm happy to answer this first, what are the types of questions that you ask to find out more information from the people on your team? Eric, I don't know if you have something, but the way I generally approach it, by the way, thank you so much for that question, Brooks. And if anybody else has any questions, feel free to throw it in. So when I start out my meetings, right, I actually try to be more specific in the types of questions that I ask, though it's fine being broad too. But if we're talking about something specific and I can sense that perhaps this isn't a program that they've used before, it's not something that they've ever created before, I'll actually ask very specific questions of like, does this, ABC, does this actually make sense? Like, or do you need me to explain it a little bit more, right? Because a lot of us have experienced this where you'll ask, okay, is everything okay? Does this make sense? And everyone's like, yes, it does. But chances are they probably have some, uncertainties that they just haven't expressed to you because you made it so broad, right? And again, I mean those questions of, okay, does anyone have any questions? And then again, nothing. So sometimes asking more specific questions has actually helped me pinpoint how I can better help people, whether this is my team or actually the people I work with. So I don't know if Eric, you have something to add there.
You bring up a great point, and I'm just going to bring this all the way back into school, whether it's elementary school, high school, and college. One of the things that I did, or for some reason I realized this early on, was that whenever the teacher's teaching something, and if I don't get it right away, I was never afraid to ask. I raise my hands and ask questions. Right?
Wow, I was not like that actually. I was scared to raise my hand.
I don't know what it is about me. I just I had some realization that I was like, if I don't get it, I either have to spend more time to go to like a TA's office or something to get clarity. But the idea that I had was there's a lot of assumptions that I make about the world and about how things operate. I assume that if I have the same confusion, that maybe 30% of the class has the exact same confusion, right? Like if the way the professor is explaining something or they go over something too quickly, I would assume everybody else probably had the same challenge or issue, but no one wanted to raise their hand or they're too scared to ask for clarification, right? And so I would go out of my way and be like, I'm the martyr, right? I will go out and I will raise my hands. I would be the one to look stupid, basically, and be the ones like, I don't understand. But at the end of the day, it helps you. And I'm sure someone out there and sitting in the classroom would appreciate that too. Maybe someone who's too scared. And I translate this back, especially with like the team. And like you mentioned before, it's like trying to ask for those clarity or clarifications among the team. Like you trained in your courses or your one-on-ones about taking that pause. Oftentimes, when I ask this to my team, it's like, hey, especially when team meetings, like, hey, is everyone good? Does anyone have any questions? Or as a follow-up, most people will naturally react. It's like, yeah, we're good, right? Because when you ask that, hey, are you good? Of course, you're gonna say, yeah, I'm good. But if you actually pause and take that extra time, always, whether it's after the meeting, someone's asking a question, they're doing a dark message to you, asking for more clarity. It's like, okay, well, that means it wasn't clear, right? And then I'm sure someone else had the same confusion, right? Maybe it was my issue that I didn't explain something correctly, or the directions that I was giving was way offline, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's why I started to just openly say, is like, does anyone have any questions? And it's okay, like, just take a few moments, and if anything else, and usually someone does. Someone will then bring up a question. It just doesn't happen immediately. It'll happen, 30 seconds later or a minute later, right?
Yeah, no, I remember back in the day, one of my favorite bosses actually was somebody who made me feel that they cared. And that made a world of a difference in terms of how motivated I was to get the job done. And he was he truly was the best boss. We would talk about, whatever struggles it was. He made me feel safe in expressing myself. So, oh my gosh, we've been on for 45 minutes now, and I think I want to wrap up. So if anybody has any last minute questions they want to add, but before we leave, Eric, I actually wanted to kind of end in some parting words, okay? So again, today's topic is about interpersonal communications. If there's one thing that you want people to take away when it comes to interpersonal communications, what would it be? I can answer first, actually, if you need time.
I will answer just because I thought of something. It just in the last 30 seconds. I think, especially with everything we just talked about, all the little tips and tricks with interpersonal communications, about building trust with your team, having that open communication, I think you'll know when that happens, because I just thought of this now, that you did a great job, especially as a manager, and knowing that your your colleagues, your manager cares about you is if you've had good relations even after you've left that job.
True.
And I think about that now because I keep in relations with not all, but majority of my old bosses, my old managers. And even just as simple as, catching up for lunch. And the very first manager that I mentioned at ADP, who was the most micromanaging person, I mean, I had a great experience working, and I realized we actually would typically catch up at least once a year and get lunch and just see how each other are doing. And I remember the last lunch we had was that I was like, man, I could tell that she just really cared about my own career when I was working as an employee, and then just caring about me as a human being, especially in my endeavors with building the businesses and everything. And I think for people here, whether they're in a team position, they're going to move up. If they're a manager or director now, that they're able to keep relations with the people they work so closely to every single day, then you've done a great job.
I completely agree. Sometimes a lot of us are so focused on, again, we have a million things to do. Everybody has a million things to do, right? And a lot of times we're also thinking about, that next step, right? How do we get that next step? How do we, close that new client or whatever? But I think in the end, promotions, opportunities are often based off the relationships you've had already. People have recommended you. People have enjoyed working with you. People know that you're capable. And again, my whole thing is people want to work with people they like, right? Actually, this is what I say to people I hire. I'm like, for me, how well I feel like we can get along really is a huge part of it. Nobody wants to go to work and work with people they don't like, right? So for any aspiring, leaders or leaders who are currently in leadership positions, I think it is worth the effort to sometimes just reach out. How are you doing to your team? And not reach out because you have something to tell them to do, right? So I think that's huge. So Eric, thank you so much. But I really have to thank my audience here. We have about 50 people right now. For those who stayed, for those who jumped in the middle, I appreciate you guys so much. I appreciate you guys being part of my Soulcast Media community. Again, my whole goal with this company is really just to teach people how to be better, more confident communicators. Like that's really it, right? And so with the Soulcast Media Lives, I invite guests up, every month, and we just kind of talk about communications, answer any communications questions. I try to make every month different. So before we leave, Eric, how can people find you? Where can people find you? Any information that you don't want to leave for us?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn myself. And I realized, like, looking back, that most of my connections that I had built were basically prospects during my sales time. But the fact that I was able to engage with a good amount of them, that they've been supportive back. And so I want to obviously, get in touch with your audience. Like all of them here, they're asking great questions, they're commenting, they're very supportive. So it's such a great community and audience that you've built up. And so that just means your interpersonal communication and your marketing and the brand that you portray is working with you. But yeah, people can feel free to find me on LinkedIn with Eric Chen. I'm sure there's a lot, but if you type in Sabobatage, the boba card game, or needthat.com, you guys can find me there. So happy to connect.
Thank you so much, Eric. I always enjoy our conversations. And again, thank you everybody who is here. You guys, again, probably follow me on LinkedIn already, but if you don't, make sure to follow me. I'm always posting communications content. So let's stay in touch, and I'll talk to you guys all soon. Bye, everybody.